کاوش مدیا.
And to be honest, I think Iran has got very good strategic reasons of its own for wanting a military capability. Now, that doesn't mean that I have to agree with them on it. That's not the point. But the important point is to recognize Iran's strategic thinking, and that from their perspective, they really do have a variety of very good reasons. First of all, if you look at the world from Tehran, I think you basically see the United States on all sides. There are American allies in the immediate region. There are American military bases and other facilities and capabilities in the immediate region. The United States toppled two neighboring regimes in the space of 2 years, just about 20 years ago today. The Taliban in Afghanistan, Iran's primary ideological rival, and then Saddam Hussein in Iraq, their primary strategic rival. The Bush administration spoke explicitly about regime change in Iran had things gone a little bit more successfully in Iraq. As a matter of fact, there has been legislation in the United States on the books, congressional legislation, ever since the revolution, calling for regime change. Now, not all American administrations have pursued that objective to the same extent. Some actually haven't, but some certainly have. So Bush was speaking about it, and had things gone well in Iraq, I think Iran was next on the list. In point of fact, the United States is probably the only existential threat to the Islamic Republic. No one else can threaten their very existence. Secondly, and this was the original impetus for the nuclear program, but has decreased greatly in importance over the years. The original impetus was, of course, the 8-year-long war with Iraq, the Iran-Iraq war in the 1980s, a horrifically bloody war. Something like 500,000 Iranians lost their lives in that war. The precise number is unknown, probably a similar number of Iraqis. But for Iran, it remains an open wound to this day. There are memorial services, there are monuments all around Iran commemorating the events. Iran remembers very vividly the sense of being completely alone in the world, including when Saddam was firing chemical missiles at them, and no one in the world cared particularly. That was the original impetus, and of course, Iraq does not present a significant threat to Iranian security today, at least not a military threat. A third strategic consideration is Pakistan. And that's a topic that you all, I'm sure, know far more about than I do. But for Iran, Pakistan is a long-standing Sunni rival, a, shall we say, less than stable regime with a large nuclear arsenal. And no one wants to see, it's not as if the relationship between the two is a particularly bad one. They cooperate reasonably well, but no one wants to see a nuclear arsenal right on their border, especially given the instability of the regime. There's the confrontation with Israel that I'll come back to in a minute. Iran, I believe, also wants to be, at a bare minimum, the regional leader in the Middle East, possibly the regional hegemon. There's reason to believe that that's the objective. And they believe that a nuclear capability will enable them to achieve that objective, and that a new deal also addresses the other issues that were not addressed at the time, the ballistic missile program and Iran's growing regional expansionism. Now, Iran is trying very intensively in recent years to set up its own military presence in Syria, air, ground, and naval. And it has built up a huge presence of Shiite militias there, many tens of thousands. And it has begun building up, or not, no longer begun, it is in the process of trying to build up a Hezbollah presence there as well, Now, Hezbollah has got somewhere between 130 and 150,000 rockets in Lebanon. It'll be a while before they have that many in Syria, but their effort is to create one joint Lebanese-Syrian border. If you can picture the map, Lebanon and Syria are bordering countries. They both border Israel to the north. The idea is to turn it into one joint front against Israel. And if you take the rockets in Lebanon, then add a similar number or a growing number in Syria to that number, I mean, this is just a vast threat right on Israel's border, on its border, and add the Iranian presence in Syria. This was actually, short of Iran going nuclear, this is actually the primary threat that Israel faces already today. And the next war, if and when it breaks out with Hezbollah, is going to be an extremely ugly war for everyone concerned. I'd rather be on the Israeli side of the border, to be honest, if it happens, but that's a very little comfort because I think Israel's home front will be hit in a way that it has never been hit in our history. It will be devastated. And so that's another issue that Israel wants the US to address.
آنچه در مورد ما میگویند